I'm your host, Michael Messerly, and this is Scary, but True. Deep in the Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union, 9 experienced hikers set out on a journey that should have been routine. They were young, skilled, confident. Led by a 23-year-old engineering student named Igor Dyatlov, they documented everything: photos, jokes, notes. They were not reckless. They knew exactly what they were doing. They also kept journals. What you're about to hear comes directly from those entries. We know that snow can be very deep. We know that snow can be very hard. We know that snow can be very dangerous. It reads like a joke. The kind of thing you write when you're tired, cold, but still in control. We are setting up camp for the night. It is cold, but we are used to it. They had done this before. Long treks, brutal conditions, sub-zero temperatures. This wasn't new. I wonder what fate has in store for us. It is very cold here, but beautiful. This was written just days before everything ended. We are freezing, but spirits are high. These are the last known words written by any of them. No fear, no panic, no warning. In January of 1959, 9 hikers set out from a Russian city on a long-distance ski expedition across the northern Ural Mountains. Their goal was ambitious, but not unusual for them: a Category 3 trek, the highest difficulty rating at the time. It means extreme cold, dangerous terrain, and zero margin for error. First, they traveled by train, then by truck, slowly making their way toward the end of civilization. On January 27th, they began their long trek. There were originally 10 members that set about this expedition. One day into the journey, Yuri Yudin had to turn back early due to severe health conditions, a decision that would save his life. The remaining 9 pressed on, skiing deeper and deeper into the mountains day after day. They joked, they sang, and they documented everything. Photos show them smiling, laughing, and building a camp in the snow. Nothing about their journey suggested danger. Until February 1st. That afternoon, the weather was particularly brutal. Instead of descending the mountain for shelter, they chose to camp on the exposed slope of a mountain known as Kholat Syakhl. Translated from the local Menzi language, it means dead mountain. That night, they camped on the open hillside. No trees, no protection from the wind, just snow and darkness. They ate, they wrote in their journals, they settled in. And at some point, something made them cut their way out of their tent. Not one at a time, all of them. They left behind their boots, their coats, everything they would need to survive, and they walked out into the freezing night. Before leaving, Dyatlov had told Yuri Yudin, the man that had stayed behind, that he would send a telegram as soon as the group returned. When Yudin didn't receive this telegram, he reported his friends missing. On February 26th, their tent and belongings were found. The campsite absolutely baffled the search party. The tent had been cut open from the inside with a pocket knife. All of their belongings, including shoes, were left inside the tent. 9 sets of footprints left by people wearing only socks, a single shoe, or even barefoot could be followed, leading down to the edge of a nearby wood on the opposite side of the pass. 1.5 kilometers, or 0.93 miles, to the northeast. At the forest's edge, under a small tree, searchers found the first two bodies. They were next to the remains of a campfire, shoeless and dressed in only their underwear. The branches on the tree were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting that one of the hikers had climbed up to look for something, possibly the camp. 3 more bodies were found in between the tree and the camp, in poses suggesting that they were trying to get back to the tent. It took 4 months to find the remaining 4 travelers. 3 of the 4 were better dressed than the others, and there were signs that some clothing of those who had died first had been removed for use by the others. One hiker was wearing another hiker's burned and torn trousers, and her left foot and shin were wrapped in another's jacket. Initially, it was believed that each hiker died of hypothermia. There was a small crack in the skull of one of the first hikers found, but it was deemed that it was not a fatal wound. Then, they examined the 4 bodies found months after the incident. 3 of the hikers had suffered major injuries, 1 fatal skull damage, and 2 suffered from a massive chest fracture. The amount of force to cause such major damage would have to be extremely high, comparable to a car accident. The bodies had no external wounds associated with the bone fractures, as if they had been subjected to a high level of pressure. One body was missing her tongue, eyes, part of the lips, as well as facial tissue and a fragment of skull bone. Another was missing his eyeballs, and another his eyebrows. At the time, the official conclusion was that group members had died because of a compelling natural force. There was some speculation that the local Mansi tribe had murdered the travelers, but there was no other footprints and there was no evidence to hold this claim. There is speculation that they were fleeing from an avalanche, but the location did not have any evidence of an avalanche occurring. Footprint patterns leading away from the tent were inconsistent with someone, let alone a group of 9 people running in panic from either real or imagined danger. All the footprints leading away from the tent and toward the woods were consistent with all individuals walking at a normal pace. And maybe the most unsettling part of all isn't the injuries or the missing pieces or even the mystery of what drove them out into the cold. It's the fact that just hours before, they were laughing, riding, completely at peace. 9 people experienced and prepared, undone not by what they knew, but by something they didn't see coming. Something that gave them no time to think, no time to plan, only time to leave. And whatever happened on that mountain, whatever forced them into the dark, it was powerful enough to turn calm into chaos in a matter of moments. Because the truth is, out there in that silence, something happened, and we still don't know what it was. If you're enjoying Scary But True, please leave a like and comment. Let me know what you think of the show. And follow me wherever you're listening, as that really helps me out. Thank you so much for listening. Now back to the episode. In July 1996, 34-year-old Egbert Rimkus, his girlfriend, 27-year-old Cornelia Meyer, his 11-year-old son, George Weber, and his girlfriend's 4-year-old son, Max Meyer, arrived at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, traveling from Germany. Egbert and his girlfriend, Cornelia, were excited to see the U.S. and explore some of the most iconic places in America. They were also wanting to get their two children, George and Max, to grow closer and overall bond together more as a family. After arriving at the Seattle airport, Egbert and Cornelia would drag their tired children on one last flight to the Los Angeles airport, where they would rent a green 1996 Plymouth minivan. The family had a great couple days together in the San Clemente area of Southern California, and then drove that minivan to Las Vegas, where they stayed at the Treasure Island Hotel and Casino. The family then drove to Death Valley National Park, where they spent the night in Hanapa Canyon near Telescope Peak. The next day, they traveled to several tourist sites in the area before heading over the Mangle Pass toward Death Valley, a place known for extreme heat, isolation, and dangerous terrain if you don't know where you're going. Temperatures in Death Valley can climb well over 120 degrees. This is a very hostile and dangerous area. At some point during their drive, the family left the main paved roads. No one knows why. On July 27th, Egbert's ex-wife, Heike Weber, was growing increasingly concerned as her ex-husband and son had not returned home from their vacation. She began to inquire with the proper authorities about the whereabouts of her family. Egbert had booked a flight from Los Angeles International Airport on July 27th, but none of the family members had boarded the flight or departed from the United States that day. Months later, in October of 1996, two searchers stumbled upon the green 1996 Plymouth minivan that the family had rented. The van was found in a very remote area known as Anvil Canyon. Now, Anvil Canyon is not a place you stumble into accidentally. It is a rugged and isolated area, completely devoid of traffic. The car was parked awkwardly in the canyon, tires partially sunk, and clearly unable to move. Inside the vehicle, the searchers found something unsettling. There were still personal belongings of the family: food, clothing, and even water. Nothing about the inside of the car seemed panicked or like a desperate escape. It seemed organized, like the family had made a decision, and that decision was to leave the car. Now, if you know anything about survival in extreme environments, this is where this becomes difficult to understand. When you are lost in a desert, you stay with a vehicle. A car is shelter. It is visible from the air, and it increases your chances of being found. Leaving it in almost every situation is the wrong choice. The Rimkus family didn't just leave, they walked straight into the desert. Searches for the missing family began, combing the whole surrounding area, but Death Valley is massive, harsh, and unforgiving. Egbert, Cornelia, and their children vanished completely. They were missing for years with no answers, no trail, no confirmed sightings, nothing that explained where they went or why. On November 12th, 2009, a full 13 years after their disappearance, a major discovery was made. A hiker found skeletal remains of both Egbert and Cornelia. Their bodies were located miles away from the minivan, in a direction that didn't lead to any known roads or help. There was no clear reason why they would have chosen that path. Years later, additional remains were found that were believed to belong to one of the children, but not all family members were ever fully accounted for. But the biggest question remained: why did they leave the safety of their vehicle? Some believe they simply underestimated the desert, that they thought help was closer than it actually was. that they made a desperate attempt to walk out and didn't realize how far they had to go. Maybe the heat, the isolation, the desperation pushed them into making a fatal decision. But even then, the details are hard to ignore. They left supplies, water behind. They traveled in a completely random direction and even covered a huge distance before collapsing. This suggests that they weren't acting randomly. They were trying to get somewhere. They just never made it. On February 24th, 1978, 5 men from Yuba City pile into a car, excited for the next day ahead of them. The men were Gary Mathias, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Ted Weir, and Jackie Hewitt. These friends were close, bonded especially by their shared love of basketball. They were part of a social club, which involved playing on an organized basketball team, and they had a game coming up the next morning. They were so excited for this big game that they had everything ready. Their clothes were laid out, shoes were packed, and each of them were ready to get up early the next morning. When they left that night to go watch a college basketball game in Chico, California, it was only supposed to be a fun outing before an important day. They watched the game, stopped for snacks, they laughed, and then they started driving home. This was the last time any of them were seen alive. Sometime after 10 p.m., something changed. Instead of heading back home, their car began to travel in the opposite direction, up into the mountains in an area called Plumas National Forest. Now this is important because these men were not experienced with wilderness travel. They had no reason to go there, plus it was winter. The roads were dark, winding, and covered in snow, but for some reason, they kept going. Days passed, and the men never showed up for their big game. Their families obviously became worried, so the search efforts began. But there were no leads because no one had any idea where they had gone. 4 days later, on February 28th, a forest ranger discovered their car, a 1969 Mercury Montego. The car was sitting abandoned on a remote mountain road near Orville Quincy Road in California, and right away, it was clear that this scene didn't make much sense. The car wasn't crashed, it wasn't damaged, and it wasn't stuck. There was little snow on the ground, but nothing the car couldn't handle. There was even fuel still inside of the tank. The keys were missing from the ignition, and inside they found snack wrappers, maps, jackets, but no sign of the men at all. It looked like they had simply gotten out of the vehicle and walked away. The search went on for months, and the teams found nothing due to the harsh winter conditions until spring, when the snow finally began to melt. Deep in the forest, miles from the abandoned car, a group of motorcyclists found a trailer. It was a small Forest Service cabin, and inside was a decomposed body of Ted Weir. He was lying in bed, surrounded by blankets, but Ted had survived for weeks, maybe even months in this cabin. Inside the trailer, there were supplies, food rations, a stove, water, enough to last a long time, but it wasn't even touched. Cans were sealed, military rations sat unopened, a propane tank was available to use for heat, but it had never been used. There were even heavy jackets the men could have used to stay alive, but they went untouched. Ted had lost a huge amount of weight. His beard had grown out, And based on the evidence, investigators believe that he had been alive for 8 to 13 weeks before dying, which raises a chilling question. If he had food, if he had shelter, why didn't he use it? Nearby, the bodies of 2 other men were found scattered along the path between the car and the trailer. They had died from exposure. One man was missing his shoes. The other had wrapped his feet in makeshift coverings, trying to survive the cold. It was clear that they had been walking, trying to get somewhere, but never made it. The last 2 of the 5 men were never found, one of them being Gary Mathias. Gary was the only one in the group with any military experience, the only one who had spent time outdoors, and the only one who might have known how to survive in those conditions, but he vanished. No remains, no confirmed sightings, nothing. So what happened that night? Why did they drive into the mountains in the first place, only to leave their car and walk into the freezing mountain wilderness with no proper gear? Why ignore food and shelter? A popular theory is they just got lost. They took a wrong turn and became disoriented, but that doesn't explain why they kept going deeper into the mountains. Others think they may have encountered something else out in the forest, that something or someone had scared them enough to make them flee. And then, there is the possibility that something else happened, something we don't fully understand. When you look at the decisions these men had made, they don't feel random, they feel guided, like they were trying to reach something or escape something. The worst part is that they were so close to safety. If they had just stayed in the car, they probably would have survived. If they had used the supplies in the trailer, they could have made it out alive, but instead, they kept moving deeper into the cold, further away from help, until one by one, they disappeared. What could possibly make 5 men abandon safety and willingly walk into the dark? On October 21st, 1978, a 20-year-old pilot named Frederick Valentich took off from Melbourne. Originally, this was supposed to be a simple flight, a routine flight to King Island. He was flying a light aircraft, a Cessna 182. Reports showed clear weather conditions, no storms, no warnings, nothing unusual. At around 7 p.m., while he was cruising over the water near Bay Strait, he made a call to air traffic control. Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000 feet? The controller responded that there was no known aircraft in the area. There should have been nothing else out there, just him. But then, Valentich said something that changed everything. There is an aircraft. It seems to be following me. At first, he wasn't panicking, just confused, trying to understand what he was seeing. He described the object, saying that it was moving fast, that it was moving above him, then below him, then circling him. The controller asked him to confirm. Was it another plane? Then Valentich hesitated, and then said, "It's not an aircraft." That's when his tone changed. His voice becomes tighter, less certain. You could hear it in the recording. The shift from curiosity to something else.
Delta Sierra Juliet, and confirm you cannot identify the aircraft. Delta Sierra Juliet, roger. Stand by. Can you describe the aircraft? Delta Sierra Juliet, Juliet, Roger. How large would her object be?
Back on the radio, Valentich continued describing the object, saying it had a green light, that it was metallic and moving in ways that didn't make sense. At one point, he said the object was playing some sort of game with him, testing him. He then begins to lose his orientation, saying that the thing is orbiting on top of him. The controller tried to keep him focused, asking for his altitude, his heading, but Valentich sounded distracted, like he couldn't keep his eyes off of whatever was out there.
Delta Sierra Juliet. Delta Sierra Juliet, confirm the aircraft just vanished behind us. Delta Sierra Juliet, is the aircraft still with you?
This object was directly above him. He was disoriented and couldn't make any sense of what was going on. And then finally, a sound, a metallic, scraping noise. Grinding and distorted, like something was interfering with the signal. Then, nothing. The transmission ended. No distress call, no crash report, no final coordinates. Frederick Valentich had just disappeared, seemingly out of thin air. A massive search operation was launched for the pilot. Air, sea, coastline, absolutely nothing was found. No wreckage, no oil, no debris, or any sign that the plan had gone down at all, as if the aircraft simply vanished. Now, Valentich could have become distorted, that he mistook a planet or his own lights reflected in the water, that he spiraled down and crashed into the ocean. But that doesn't explain the object's movement, the way he described it, circling and hovering around him, and it certainly doesn't explain the sound, that final noise that came through the radio. Others believe that he encountered something else in the sky that day, something unknown. This didn't happen in a remote forest or deep in the mountains. This happened in the clear blue sky, clear conditions, full communication, and yet he's gone. Disappeared without a trace or an explanation. Just a recording, his voice telling us what he's experiencing. We only know about this because he told us right before the signal went silent. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a like, review, or a comment. As always, the original stories are linked down in the description below, and I claim no credit for the stories themselves. Be sure to follow the show everywhere at Scary But True Pod. And if you have your own scary story that you'd like me to share, email it to me at scarybutTruePod@gmail.com. My name is Michael Messerly, and I'll see you next time with more Scary But True.